concept of the PMO, right? So project management office, I think, has gotten a lot of like negativity over the years. There was a big boom with the Project Management Institute, and there's all kinds of methodologies out there like Prince 2. But really the intent of a PMO is to introduce standards into your organization, and those standards can help you enforce policies and procedures so that you have repeatable business. That's really the core, is that you have predictable and repeatable business so that you have a solid foundation upon which to work with customers, to develop offerings, to do services delivery. It brings order to chaos, so to speak. And of course, with that also comes some oversight where you want to be able to know who's doing what and have somebody be on top of that to see, how the delivery process is going. Okay. The things that really you should watch out for, though, with a PMO is it does have some negativity to it. Even the best PMOs still have some negativity because there is an investment, a cost and investment, whether it's bodies, whether it's technology. There is some cost in implementing a PMO, but the benefit of that should definitely outweigh the cost because the cost is making you more efficient as an organization. The other thing you have to watch out for with a PMO is it can become sort of just rubber stamp paperwork stuff. So you're not actually gaining any benefits. You're just checking a bunch of boxes, and there's not an understanding of what those boxes are driving in the organization. So you certainly don't want it to become a paperwork engine, and you don't want it to gather too much data. Gathering data for gathering data's sake is not going to be a benefit to the organization because you have to understand how you're going to consume that data, how you're going to use that data to drive efficiencies, to drive evolution within your organization. Okay. Now, the benefits of a PMO in general are really what is it that a PMO needs to do for your organization. I mentioned order to chaos, but that could be anything in your organization. You could feel that your organization is running fairly smoothly, but you're not able to take on larger projects, for example, or you're not able to go down the path of solutioning versus product enablement. So a PMO could be, how do I elevate the way that we're doing stuff to make it more efficient so that it's then more scalable so we can handle larger projects. So really a PMO is, in my opinion, what should be something that it's a benefit to your organization. So you define whatever it means, and to define what it means, you have to give it a charter. You have to say what it's responsible for, identify what the PMO's objectives are, what the PMO is driving or accountable for, and what the PMO is not responsible for. In past PMO setups that I've done with large companies, one of the things that I always thought the PMO role is to be back office only. Like they are not customer facing, they don't drive status reports, they are not project managing. They are driving the betterment of what project managers need to do. So they're always behind the scenes. But that may not be what you need in your organization. So a PMO is whatever it is you need it to be. And you need to define what you expect the outcomes to be and what the benefits are to the organization in establishing that PMO. So like here's an example of a charter that it's quite long, but it's very comprehensive, where the goal of the PMO is to establish standard processes and predictable delivery results, to be able to make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing by training people internally. And their end goal is to increase profitability, because with profitability comes repeatability, with standards comes repeatability, which drives profitability because you know what to expect when and anticipate risks along the way. So establishing what the PMO means to your organization, that drives what a PMO does in the organization. So the classic PMO that I was always trained on as part of the whole PMI type methodology does not actually need to exist in the world. You can make it be whatever it is you need it to be for your organization. So as I was thinking about project management offices and sort of how I've worked with customers on establishing them or established them in my own companies, I've kind of come up with sort of 4 different takes on what a project management office could be, and I've come up with 4 different categories of types of PMOs based on that. And we'll go into each one of these, but it's, there's your basic PMO, there's a mixed PMO, a transparent PMO, and a modern PMO. So those are kind of buzzwords that I'll use throughout the rest of the presentation. But as we get into each of these, you'll see how there's really no right or wrong way to do a PMO. There's a right and wrong way to do a PMO for your organization. So these should give you some ideas of what to think about as you're putting together the concepts of what you need a project management office to be responsible for. So let's start with the basic PMO. In my mind, the basic PMO is it lives up to the word basic. It's no frills. There's no oversight monitoring. There's no head of the PMO in place. There's no measurements in place. There really is sort of an established process and an established template repository. You may have somebody sort of be in charge of the templates, but they're certainly not, that's not their full-time job. It could be something that they're just helping with along the way. But basically you roll out saying, okay, here's our methodology, here's the templates we have to deliver, train everyone up on it, go. Right? So you're empowering people to basically individually be the PMO because they're following the processes and templates that you put in place. Of course, the trade-offs for this are if you don't have any kind of measures in place, you don't necessarily have any accountability. So, it's one of those things that no news from a customer is good news. That works well on the basic PMO structure, but no news from a customer could also be bad news because they're disappointed or they're thinking that there might be some challenges and you're just not hearing the complaint. So you really need to have some measures in place. You need to check for compliance. There's no collection of documentation or oversight of the projects to make sure people are actually doing the methodology or following or using the templates. You're definitely empowering people to self-manage. In some organizations that I've worked at, I am pleasantly surprised that this works well because there's a personal accountability that the personal accountability culture exists in the organization. But that doesn't work in many companies. So if you can put this kind of process in place, make sure there's adequate training, and empower your folks to do self-management, great. This is a low-cost, high-upside process, but you have to trust your employees. You have to trust the people who are doing the work. And sometimes without oversight, without accountability, there can be stumbles along the way in having this type of basic PMO work. The mixed PMO is where you want someone who's a project manager to define and run the PMO. And in the beginning, this works great because you have someone who's actually doing project management, being responsible for defining what project managers should do. Of course, you have to pick the right person or people that would drive what a PMO definition is. But they are, since they are the ones that hands on the ground know what's going on, then they should be the ones that also should identify, what, we should definitely do reviews, and here's how we should publish the results, and here's what we should be measured on, and help have that PM run the PMO and be the bridge between the teams and the management staff so they could pass that information on. Now, the challenge here is that if that project manager is then put into this PMO role, they will tend to do non-billable work, right? So you can probably guess what my next challenge is going to be. In the mixed PMO, that PMO person, because they're a project manager also, they are both non-billable and billable. So they're trying to do 2 jobs at the same time, or they're trying to wear 2 hats at the same time, and those hats conflict with each other because they have the pressure to achieve the revenue and billability of a project manager and the project, but they're also under the pressure to deliver an understanding and oversight of what the projects are doing. the measurements, the accountability to make sure everyone's following the right processes. And anyone who's been in this type of role knows what happens when you have to choose between bringing money in or making sure things are running smoothly. It tends to go toward bringing money in, right? So what ends up happening is the project manager who's responsible for that PMO starts focusing on their own projects again. Once the PMO is up and running, they will then start having to tip the scales down to their own projects, which means they're not necessarily spending enough time being the overseer, the PMO lead, so to speak, and making sure the PMO is actually being effective. And that introduces risk, because if you've set that structure up to have that oversight and then that oversight goes away, then if people are not self-enabled or self-managing, they will start to stray from the methodology, and now you start opening yourself up for risks and issues as it relates to the oversight of projects. So I call this one the mixed PMO because I think it's always a good source to have a PMO built based on someone's hands-on experience in the organization, a project manager, but you almost have to make a decision in a mixed PMO. Is that person going to run the PMO, or are they going to stay a PM? Are they going to hand it off to someone else to be the overseer? Because in a mixed PMO situation, you always have that conflict. You always have that, should I be doing my own project work versus should I be doing the PMO work for the company? Okay. As with all of these PMO thoughts, I always find that there's an upside to the category. So the upside for a mixed PMO is you do actually, at some point in time in a mixed PMO, you have a completely defined project management office with objectives and accountability and measures in place along with training. Like, you have the whole thing set up. It's the continued maintenance and monitoring of that is what could falter in a mixed PMO. And then the third one is sort of the Cadillac version, transparent PMO, I call it. And this is where you're basically publishing everything out. You've got ways that you're capturing metrics, you're doing trending. Our projects in certain size projects always over budget. How can you streamline that? So you're doing a lot of data mining within the information that you're capturing. You're doing a lot of measures along the way. You're doing a lot of compliance checks. You're doing a lot of project overviews and publications out to the organization, both for management and for project management. For this to be effective, you do need to have someone sort of own the PMO, not doing a separate job on top of the PMO. They need to be the PMO because it becomes more than just paper pushing. It's definitely analytics. It's definitely coordination. It's definitely encouraging or involving the management organization on how to continue to do change management and evolve the organization to be more efficient, more effective, or introduce more offerings based on the data findings. So this transparent PMO does require, I think, a full-time person to be responsible, and they're the ones that just sort of make sure everything always happens along the way. Now, the challenge with the PMO, I think, is because you can actually measure lots of stuff. There's hours and margin and headcount and type of resource and skill sets and phases of a project, or the sprints within an agile methodology and change orders and actual versus plan. Like, there's tons of metrics you can measure from a project delivery, from a project performance. The challenge with a transparent PMO, if somebody's full-time job is to gather all this data, they could actually gather too much data. So that person also has to understand how to present the data in a way that is meaningful and that action can be taken from it, because that information can be consumed in a manner that drives people to action or drives decisions in the organization. So you almost have to take a little bit of a step back, because you can go overboard with data collection. You have to look at what's important for project success. For a PMO to be effective, your main goal is making sure that your delivery offerings are repeatable and predictable, that you are staying within the budgets or the established estimate efforts that were put into the SOWs, and that you're following procedures and compliance mechanisms like change orders change requests, and status reports so that there's information captured along the way about how the delivery worked. So really the transparent PMO has to have a little bit of a self-control involved so that they're not trying to do everything and give people more paperwork to do. They should take ownership of that and be able to organize the data. Now, a transparent PMO, because they have all this great information in the system and they want to be able to have people act on it, they do have to think about ways that they want that data to be delivered out. What you don't want to do is you won't want to have a spreadsheet on somebody's desktop and that they're just looking at it and spitting numbers out to people. So you want to make the information known so that you have encouragement and participation in the PMO by the organization. So think about things like dashboards, maybe open mic sessions where you're kind of iterating where the trending's coming from, maybe brown bag lunches, certainly some PM training on a regular basis to encourage people on how to make some adjustments to what they're doing. There's lots of ways to publish the data, but you have to make sure that you publish in a way that people consume it. Don't throw it on a page in an intranet that you hope people are going to visit. Right? So find a way to get it delivered effectively so that people can see the benefit of the PMO. And then the last category is really this thing called the modern PMO. So I always realized that project management offices existed way before technology was available, and long before these PSA solutions like NetSuite OpenAir and Financial Force and Kimball all kind of came into existence. But a PSA itself is actually something that helps the PMO person, especially in that transparent PMO world. But also it's a good thought to support any of these models, because what a PMO gives you the ability to do is introduce more automation for visibility of data and less central manpower. So you may not need as many people to crunch data or to keep spreadsheets or to perform detailed project reviews. A lot of that information can be captured automatically in a PSA tool. So I kind of think of this as a modern PMO because it's sort of like a mixture of the three that we've talked about, like leveraging technology to replace manpower, but you still have to have manpower to define what that technology needs to do and who needs to see it. Right? So it's a kind of a good combination of all three of those PMO offerings. When you have a PSA in-house, this is where you can introduce more checks and balances to make sure there is compliance, to automate processes, make data very visible and consumable, have dashboards available, and encourage people to leverage the tool for insight into what's going on. So it does give you more of a holistic view of what's going on with projects, but at a detailed level and at a rolled up level, maybe by practice, maybe by product, because many PSAs have a database behind them that gives you the ability to slice and dice the data the way you need to, versus having to rely on things like spreadsheets going forward. Okay. So I do think that PMOs have a place today in organizations. I think a lot of large companies, they either really want to have a PMO or they used to have a PMO and they didn't really execute on it very well, so they sort of let that flounder and now they're finding themselves wanting to put one back in. But I do think a project management office does have a role in today's services organization, and whether you call it like the process compliance office or whatever, it's going to be a way to standardize process, standardize deliverables where possible, and capture metrics for viewing, not only to see what was done, but how to do it better going forward. So you certainly want those measures in place, and those measures are most effective if you can implement like a PSA solution to be able to capture those metrics in a more automated way. But really the message I would want you to take away from this short webinar is there is not a standard PMO anymore. There's concepts that you can beg, borrow, and steal from to build a PMO that makes sense for your organization, because it needs to make sense for your organization. Sit down and define what that PMO objective is, and craft the charter around it and build it in that view. If you need to have somebody in charge of it, of course, account for that in budgets and headcount, but understand how that money is going to be recuperated or recouped based on the efficiencies that you'll see on the delivery. Okay, because that is a long-term investment, and if you don't see a clear benefit after 3 months, you have to stick with it because change is hard. People can't switch gears in the middle of something. Put a PMO in place and let it sit there and deliver benefits for at least a year. And after that year, check and see where it needs to be adjusted so that you can use that data coming forward and make the PMO very effective for your organization.